Megan, we may want to go ahead and get started. I would, oh, there we go.
All right.
Two Megans suddenly.
Hey, Megan, Melissa, I'm going to have the same trouble next time because I only got the link to the first interview. The email that you just forwarded that enabled me to hear, I never got. So I don't have the next ones either.
I will make sure Cheryl or I get those over to you, Mayor.
Okay, and the link in the calendar invite, when I click on that, even though it says go to webinar, it still takes me to Teams anyway.
All right, we'll make sure to get those to you.
Okay.
All right, so thank you again for joining us, Ms. Wells. My name is Megan Paterni. I will be facilitating the interview. I will let the panel briefly introduce themselves, starting with Chair of the Policy Committee, Mayor Ross.
You're muted, Mayor.
Okay, let's try this again.
There you go.
Good morning, Ms. Wells. My name is Andy Ross. I am the mayor of the city of Temple Terrace, and I also serve as the chair of the policy committee and the vice chair of the TPO board. And so I want to thank you for joining us this morning. I know we are all looking forward to hearing from you and getting to know you a little bit, and thank you for your interest in this position. I've been asked to share with you a little information about the position. Of course, I know that you know some of this already, I would expect. But as you probably know, the executive director position reports directly to the TPO board. Although for administrative purposes, the TPO and the TPO staff are folded under the Planning Commission for administrative purposes, and then that in turn complies with Hillsborough County rules, and so all the administrative functions are funneled through Hillsborough County as kind of the host agency. So a little complicated kind of a relationship, but it works. And so again, welcome, and it's very nice to meet you, and we look forward to hearing from you.
Thank you.
Next, would Commissioner Myers like to introduce herself?
Good morning, Ms. Wells. County Commissioner Gwen Myers, representing District 3 and serving as the Vice Chair of the Hillsborough County Board of County Commission and Chair of the TPO. Welcome. Looking forward to hearing the experience of your interview, and so good luck.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Councilman Wastel or Commissioner Wastel?
Hi, Ms. Wells. I'm County Commissioner Joshua Woolstall. I am one of the countywide commissioners, so I represent all 1,100 square miles that you're looking to help us navigate better. I appreciate you applying for this position, and I look forward to the interview.
Thank you.
I guess I'm last. I'm Melissa Zornita. I'm the executive director of the Hillsborough County City-County Planning Commission. We are the long-range planning agency for all 4 local governments here in Hillsborough County, and staff of the Planning Commission serves as the staff of the Transportation Planning Organization. So look forward to talking with you. Thank you.
Thank you.
So just as some guidelines, only the panelists and facilitator and candidate will be asking questions. No questions from the audience will be permitted. Chats will not be read aloud during the interview. The chats will be entered into the written record. Each interview is being recorded. Each interview is slated for an hour, and we will commit to that time. So everyone, please be concise with the answers and any questions asked. I'll get started. In your own words, please describe the various roles filled by the Hillsborough County TPO Executive Director and how your skills and experience match up with each role.
Sure. So one of the main roles is carrying out the compliance and regulatory responsibilities of the TPO, ensuring that its obligations under federal law are complied with. And I have spent about 15 years working at executive levels of government and about 20 years total in government. both the local and the state levels. I worked in Rhode Island statewide planning, which functions as Rhode Island's MPO. And I understand the federal obligations that MPOs have to fulfill. Another responsibility of the executive director is to coordinate between the boards and the board members and also the public, and to ensure that there is consensus on some of the long-range planning goals. And so as a planner for the last 20 years, I've worked with numerous boards and political officials, finding consensus on comprehensive planning issues. I headed up Rhode Island's long-range transportation plan launch in 2017, and subsequently the mobility plan. And I've worked on a number of different planning efforts at the local and state levels throughout my tenure, including housing plans, redevelopment plans, recreational and open space plans. So you name it, I've done that, and I understand the responsibilities that go with that, including transparency, engagement, and making sure that the process is clear and thorough. Another aspect of the executive director position is monitoring staff, coordinating staff efforts, and mentoring young staff. Throughout my career, I started my career in supervisory positions. I've managed as many as 15 staff members, and I've actually worked on my own as the jack of all trades as my own staff member. I understand how to manage staff, and I've been trained to do so. I generally approach staff management in a collaborative way, but I understand that different personalities prescribe different methods. So I can help people who need more guidance with more hand-holding and more guidance and supervisory controls. And some people, you just give them a task and they take care of it and they know what they're doing. And so I can maintain the lines of communication with those folks as well. Let me see. I think, I'm trying to think, really communicating, I think, is a key role of the executive director, and being able to translate what is often technical data and analysis that we get through local and federal and state sources, and being able to communicate that in a way that people understand. It can be done graphically, but I think particularly now with people and cell phones and such, we really need to think carefully about how we communicate with the public and make it easy for them to understand. So in my roles, both on the public sector and in the private sector, I've had extensive training on communication. So as a private consultant working on climate resiliency plans, we would create 5 to 10 minute videos really talking about what we're trying to achieve, what sort of policies we have to handle, and doing online surveys and that sort of thing. Go ahead.
Excuse me, Caroline, I hate to pause, but apparently the interview does not appear to be providing any audio for the attendees. So if we just pause for a moment so that our folks can figure out what's going on.
Sure.
Oh, I can hear her.
Yes, we could all hear her. We're getting messages that the attendees cannot hear her. So we're also
I see.
the recording is picking up the audio. So okay, let's see. Okay. One moment, please.
Yeah, I don't know. Perhaps we stop recording and try starting the broadcast again. Because when we started the broadcast, it should have started sending out the audio.
Yes, PSS is on this.
Okay, I'm gonna not touch anything.
Miss Wells, what's the weather like in Rhode Island?
Well, today it's supposed to get up to 90, so it's feeling a little Florida-ish today. We've been, I know the rest of the country's been in this heat wave. We've had a little bit of a reprieve until today. Today is our first really, really hot day.
Okay,
Yeah.
good. Yeah, I think it's better to just chat instead of sit in uncomfortable, awkward silence while we figure out the recording. We do apologize for the technical difficulties.
Oh, it happens. It happens.
Yes, we have our IT team working on this right now. Thank you.
No problem.
It looks like your planner in the background. You already have the Florida mindset at heart, though.
I never left it. You know, I was born in Tampa. I don't know if you
Okay.
saw that in my resume. I spent my first 2 years in Temple Terrace, and then my family
Oh, you're
moved.
sucking up to the mayor already.
My family moved to St. Petersburg. My dad was a professor at USF.
Okay.
Okay. Nothing like Tampa.
You guys should be good to go now.
Sounds like we may be back in action.
Ask one of the attendees perhaps to chat us if they can hear us.
Is
You
it
can
just
hear Megan.
or is it everybody?
Okay.
Yes, they can hear us now, so we're good.
All right. So Caroline, not to have you reiterate, was there anything else you wanted to add to that first question?
Well, just I think you get where they're going. I think the final thing is just managing the work plan. I think is a really important aspect of this position, making sure that the UPWP is updated. I know that yours was just recently updated till next year, but that was something that we did in Rhode Island as well. So I'm very familiar and comfortable with that process.
Thank you. How can the TPO be most effective in working with our local, state, and federal governments regarding the TPO long-range planning process and moving transportation projects forward in our area?
I think first and foremost is to make sure that all of the lines of communication are open, and that can be more challenging than maybe people realize because there's always meetings and it's really about staying in the know and having those face-to-face conversations with all of the representatives of all of the different agencies so that you get the real scoop on where their priorities are and any upcoming opportunities that might be coming forward that can help the county sort of align its projects and its programs with state and federal priorities so that you can take advantage of opportunities as they arise.
Thank you. How will you collaborate with other regional and local planning agencies on common missions like economic development and transportation?
Kind of a similar answer. I think there's nothing more important than face-to-face communication on a regular basis and keeping in touch with one another when opportunities and issues arise so that you really have a team formed around certain objectives that you have in common and making sure that you're being a helpmeet to their process and they can be helpful to yours as well and that all begins with keeping everybody on the same page.
Thank you. Describe your approach to discussions about an impending MPO merger with Hillsborough, Pasco, and Pinellas.
So I don't know the details of that very well. I think that could be possibly beneficial without going too far because like I said, it's not something that I am intimately familiar with. I grew up in Pinellas. It's obviously one of the most dense areas of the state. And, but you share common issues, very common issues. And so there may be benefits to building a bigger region to approach similar issues. Not to mention that they're all connected.
Thank you. Elaborate on the communication style and manner in which you work with your staff and at what levels you directly communicate.
I try to directly communicate with all members of staff on a regular basis, whether that be, quick meetings, check-ins, informal conversations. It's important to know what people are dealing with as they arise. And as I alluded to, I think earlier, some people don't need a lot of oversight. They just know what they're doing and they're comfortable in their workspace. But I still feel like even with those people, it's important to understand, are there resources? Is there training that they need? Do they have everything they need to do their job? And also on a personal level, particularly nowadays when it is, people aren't staying in jobs. People are still moving around quite a bit. You want to make sure that people feel rewarded in their positions, that they feel like they're professionally excited about their position, because if they're not going to do the best job for the public.
Thank you. Hillsborough County consists of both urbanized and rural areas, and there are citizens in each that are interested in preserving their existing lifestyles. What experience do you have in planning for both urban and rural areas?
So I started my planning career working in Greensboro, North Carolina, which is a metro area of about 300,000 people. It's not Tampa, but it's very dense and very diverse. And it has unique issues to urban areas. For example, lack of disinvestment, blight, legacy urban renewal properties, lack of affordable housing, a lack of access to public transit and economic development opportunities. I worked there, and also working for the state of Rhode Island. Quite a bit of Rhode Island is also highly urbanized, as you know. But I've also worked in Warren, Rhode Island, which is a small community, about 10,000 people. It's actually the smallest town in the smallest state. And I worked toward conservation efforts and bike paths and connecting those dense urban neighborhoods to areas where kids would have some room to roam. And overcoming the barriers to doing so. So in Rhode Island, often water is a barrier to access. So pedestrian bridges, bike paths, canal routes. I also worked in Coventry, as you know, which is a little bit urban and a lot of it forest. So it's on the border of Connecticut. It's actually the largest community in Rhode Island. So it also has a fairly dense urban core of sort of post-war World War II housing that had issues of economic development needs, connecting people with affordable housing to transit nodes, that sort of thing. But it also had a huge historic rural area, and they really wanted to preserve their quality of life without having excess amounts of traffic running through. So I've personally worked with both urban and rural communities, and I understand those constraints.
Thank you. Considering the rapid growth and congestion in parts of our county, how do you see the balance between roadway capacity improvements and public transportation options?
This is the biggest issue, I think, not just for Hillsborough County, but for urban areas everywhere. So the question is how many lanes can you keep building to accommodate traffic? Is 6 enough? Is 8 enough? As your population grows, and it is projected to grow significantly, how are you going to accommodate all of these people and the places that they need to go? And so looking at rapid transit options, looking at the obstacles to public transit, first mile and last mile issues, how are people getting to the stations? How easy is it for them? And encouraging people who their first choice would be to take a single occupancy vehicle out. And that's a lot of people. And especially in an area like Tampa Bay, where it's so hot outside and all you would want to do is get to your air-conditioned car. Can we create choices for people not to do that, for short trips? Can we make it comfortable for them to do that? And that involves a much bigger planning analysis than just transportation. It's a whole network of what that experience is like for the person, from their house to their job, to their shopping areas, to their childcare and back.
Thank you. Describe your experience working in an organization that was led or guided by a board of individuals, such as directors, citizens, elected or appointed officials. What was your approach to topics that were controversial among the board or committee members?
So as a municipal official, we always had a manager, but above the manager was always the city or town council. And I've always had a planning commission to work with, or an economic development commission, zoning. I've worked with a number of boards. And when you have a controversial topic, I think it's really helpful to put out the data and make sure that people are all on the same page as to the facts of the situation, because misinformation can really lead you astray. So to the best of your ability, make sure that all of the facts that you know are transparent. And then start with maybe some, with your board, some preliminary conversations and briefings. Let them ask questions, let them maybe state their opinions. And so that way you can have a little bit of insight into what the thoughts are, and possibly have a follow-up conversation that's a little bit more in depth and maybe has some target goals that are set out in the beginning. Like, what are we trying to accomplish here? And go from there. I think unfortunately, or fortunately, when you have a diversity of opinions, sometimes it takes many iterations to get to a consensus.
Thank you. All right, panel, we have time for questions.
I'll ask this is a basic question that I'm asking to all of the candidates. In Hillsborough County, we have urban, suburban, and rural. A large portion of it is still rural. A lot of the individuals in the rural area often feel unheard, and they feel like these organizations focus more on the urbanization of the area rather than promoting their values. What part of your urban skill set, I know that you said you were in the small town, promoting them to get across rivers, to go to parks, etc., experience wildlife, but the majority of our rural area is agriculture. So what part of your urban planning skill sets will you be able to apply and improve the needs of the rural communities and help those suburban communities stay suburban?
Well, there's lots to unpack there. So from my experience, I actually worked closely with farmers. I worked with the USDA and the Farm Bureau, local Farm Bureau, and the Agricultural Preservation Committee here in Rhode Island to conserve about 60 acres of coastal farmland. And so I think conservation for true agricultural communities, conservation measures can give them a reprieve from the pressure of development, because it basically pays them for the highest and best use of their property while they still get to work on their property as farmers. And so that can be very helpful. I mean, farmers are the hardest working people, and they're often land rich and cash poor. So you have to understand where their pressures come from. I also worked on, as part of Warren and part of the economic challenges of rural communities, is that, as you said, they don't often feel like they have a place, but they do have a place. It has to be cultivated. So I worked on a project, it was sort of a public-private partnership for a culinary business incubator. And it sprouted up. It took place in a historic school. I had a private nonprofit person who was interested in teaching people how to cook. And I had a school, a vacant school to sell. So we worked on this project for many, many years, but we brought in farmers, and it being Rhode Island, we also brought in seafood and fishermen, and had this conversation of how can this culinary business incubator be a forum for the local agricultural community to have a stake in what's happening in urban development. So now they have a schoolyard market every Wednesday, and then they've just expanded to Providence, so they're bringing market up there. So I think that finding the opportunities can can help it be less of a competitive atmosphere and more of a, how can we work together as an urban and rural communities? What can you offer me and what can I offer you? So I feel like it may not be the role of this particular position, but more broadly in planning, I think that there are opportunities to make this a mutually beneficial relationship. But there are also ways of protecting rural communities, including, you know, your design guidelines and your zoning ordinances and that sort of thing. Also not really in the realm of this, but as we think about where you want development to happen and where you don't, those are the things that play in.
I guess I meant, I'll clarify from the transportation planning perspective. They rely heavily on commercial activity. So how would you help protect their commercial rights that are commercial needs that are critical to their businesses, which would promote them staying in the community rather than having to potentially sell?
Well, part of it, I think, is making sure that they have appropriate access. I mean, from the transportation point, I would make sure that they had appropriate access. I don't know that there's a good separation between transportation and your overall planning here, though. I think that as you plan for these places, you might want to think about, or they might want to think about, and I'm sure they are already, you know, is it possible to mix uses and maintain character so that you don't have heavy loads of traffic going to one place? And so it's not always easy when you have a rural community with an intense area of commercial activity to kind of hold it, you know, just hold the fort and you know, and make sure that everything stays the same forever, because things are constantly changing, people are constantly moving in and out, and the issues are, how do we accommodate that change without undermining the character of the area?
Okay, thank you.
Another question from the panel.
Hi, Ms. Wells. I have one. I'd like to go back to the question regarding the balance between roadway capacity improvements and public transportation options. And it kind of dovetails with what Commissioner Wassel, his question as well, in that in our community, we have it's a bit of a tension in a way, I guess. It's not to make it adversarial or anything, but that we have very diverse communities here. We have urban areas and we have very rural areas, as Commissioner Wassel was mentioning. And so there's always this tension, if you will, between improving roadway capacity and providing public transportation options. And those in the urban core prefer the latter, and those in the outlying areas of the county that are commuting to the urban core always are concerned about roadway capacity. So there's this, unfortunately, a lot of people have gotten 100% in one camp or 100% in the other, when really both are kind of necessary. So my question to you is to maybe go back and talk a little bit more in detail about your views on this balance, and then if you have any experience in communities where you've had to work through that, because some of your TPO board members are in the urban areas and some of them are in the rural areas, and some of them, like me, are kind of have one foot in both. And so what's your feeling on that?
Well, you know, working for the Rhode Island MPO, so it's not that different. So you have areas of urbanized areas like Providence and Central Falls, and you know, these are very highly dense areas. And then you have areas that are like out in the country, and they have maybe some commercial uses up on the highway, but for the most part, the neighborhoods are fairly rural or suburban. You know, there isn't an all or nothing, because how we approach this in Rhode Island in our thinking, and I tend to think it's really the only reasonable solution, is that in urban areas, public transit has to be part of the emphasis, because there is, you know, you have buildings, there's nowhere to expand roads, even if you were inclined to. So you have to figure out how you're moving more people at the same speed within that area. As we talk about suburban or rural areas, roadway access is important if it's deficient. And maybe there is some room for rapid transit for workers who are commuting. And that's where you may differ, and I would have to dig deep into your information to understand. If you have people who are living in the rural and suburban areas, but they actually work in the urban areas, much like we have here, there may be points where rapid transit of some sort, public transit, building that out may make sense. It also may make sense to start thinking about how you're building around transit nodes. So if you're going to do that, if there's going to be that public investment, then you have to make sure that development makes sense around that, because you can't keep building out public transit to bring in, you're going to eventually lose the character of your rural areas, I guess what I'm trying to get at. So it just goes hand in hand with how you're steering your development. Transit-oriented type developments make sense for young working families, but as people live different lifestyles, that's not necessarily where you want to direct your resources, is building public transit for people who are obviously living on 10 acres in the rural areas. I hope I'm making sense.
Thank you.
I had a question regarding sort of your decision-making approach. How would you determine that an issue was something that could be decided by yourself as the executive director or by staff versus bringing it to the TPO board?
I think that I would probably err on the side of bringing it to the board if I really had a question. I think you can't go wrong when you make an issue known and they can tell me, well, okay, we have faith in you, you can handle it. There are obviously things that just don't merit their time and effort. But I think if I were in doubt, or I thought that they might need to know it, I would probably actually confer with the chair and maybe the vice chair too, and just get their opinion, so I have some backing on my thinking. I don't like to work in a silo. So
All right. Does the panel have any other questions? Or if not, I will move to the candidate. All right. So what questions do you have for the panel?
Well, especially given your questions of me, what do you see as the most immediate challenges that this position is going to be dealing with? Like, envisioning the first couple of months on the job, what does that look like?
I'll take a stab at that. Well, it's no secret you were asked. We're in a transitional period. Transitional period with the state, transitional period economically. And from my perspective, you're going to need to have a massive overhaul on expectations of funding and the outcomes of what the funding can provide. The last chart I saw in the long range transportation plan, it was added into a briefing a couple months ago, stuck out to me, was that at that point they had a desire for $32 billion of improvements, I think was the number that I read. So I think that there needs to be a overhaul and approach to what the desires are and expectations. That way we can meet a more achievable goal.
Very good.
I'll take a stab at that too, Ms. Wells, and that is as a member of the TPO, and I think my colleagues would generally agree with this. This is a difficult position to be in, the executive director position I'm speaking of, and The TPO here, I think functions very well, but it is made up of a very diverse group of people with sometimes very different priorities because of the people that we represent. And so in that process, we often have back and forths and, you know, little disagreement here and there about what the priorities should be because we're representing our particular areas. But in the end, I think that process works very well. So we have a couple of things that stand out for me, and one is the idea of a pending merger between Hillsborough, Pinellas, and Pasco is looming large on us, and I think the board, although it's not adopted an official position, we have kind of agreed that we need to be proactive and engaged in this process, and so there's a lot of effort going into what could that look like and how would it be organizationally structured. So that is a huge thing. We have to provide a report to the state of Florida by the end of this calendar year. So that's looming large. The other thing, and I don't see this going away, and it's related, and that is there's always kind of a struggle to balance the larger projects, which are, well, I was going to say they're mostly in the urban core, but that's not true. We have some large projects along the interstate systems too. But to balance these large regional projects while at the same time paying enough attention to neighborhood issues in local smaller cities, Plant City, Temple Terrace, and even within Tampa, some of the neighborhoods, it doesn't affect the entire city. It's a neighborhood issue. And so it's always a struggle. You know, some of these projects are $500 million and everybody kind of generally agrees that we need to do that. And then other times it's, you know, a $5 million project that's only important to one neighborhood, but it's very important to the quality of life in that neighborhood, the people that live in that neighborhood. And so that's a balance. I don't know that nobody can ever do that perfectly, probably, but you ask, you know, what are the things that are looming? And I think those are two big parts of being successful for whoever gains this position is the ability to balance that.
Very good, thank you. Well, you kind of addressed my next question because what is the TPO not doing right now that it should be doing, in your view? If anything.
From
I'll
my
take a
short
stab.
perspective, oh, go ahead.
We're doing a lot here in Hillsborough County. One of the things when we look at and have conversation, we talk a lot about our region. And we had a joint meeting a couple of months ago about our region, even though we have not merged yet. But when you look at the growth and everything around Tampa, St. Pete, Clearwater, and Pinellas County, it can be very challenging. It's going to be a discussion coming up later to talk about the merger. But some of us feel that we work around, particularly at the international airport, when you have people coming from other cities here into Tampa. So I would say we want to make our TPO much stronger and how the executive director would interact with our staff. What would one be looking at as the position that he or she will hold to be inspired to the employees and the vision that he or she would bring to this position. So right now, we have Ms. Beth Alden that's leading our TPO, working with Melissa Zanita, who's on the call now. Those two working together have been a win-win for our county in moving our TPO in the right direction, and would like to see it continue to go in that right direction with their leadership that they have given to Hillsborough County already.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, my short answer to that is that it's too unfair to answer the question directly, but from my perspective, it goes back to my question, which is that it appears that there is a hypercentric focus on the city of Tampa. And the city of Tampa only represents 21% of Hillsborough County, and I think that that's an extremely important variable. I mean, Commissioner Myers has got a huge middle section that goes up and down the county now, and a lot of people have a lot of different needs that are not in the city of Tampa, but that's less of a result of anything that you would have control over, though, and I think that that's an important thing going back to to Mayor Ross's statement, which is we're a board governance structure, and in the last several years, that board governance structure has been heavily tilted to the city of Tampa. So those will be challenges to make sure that we don't lose focus of the fact that there is a huge swath of people here that are all different, dealing with varying needs. So that would be something to keep in mind, that we have a wide variety of needs, not just one municipality.
Makes sense. Great. So in terms of staffing, and especially in consideration of a merger, do you feel like staffing is adequate? Have you done a needs and gap analysis of staff? Do you feel like there's something, anything missing there that I should be cognizant of?
At least since I've been on the board, Ms. Wells, I've not heard any issues of needing to increase our staffing level. And certainly I can't speak for the entire board on, well, really on anything, but I think probably most of the board members would agree that now would probably be not the best time for us to add positions until we resolve the potential issue of a merger. We wouldn't, probably not the time to restructure or add positions until we figure out what we're going to do in terms of merging or not merging or whatever, however that's going to look.
Okay, I guess I was thinking also just in terms of this rural and urban, do you have staff that specializes in the rural areas, and are they regularly meeting with those rural areas? Are you getting their input and their feedback, and are they active participants in that planning process? So not so much as staff, but like, is there a need?
Sure. Well, my opinion, and this is only my opinion, I think our staff does a very good job of public outreach and smaller town hall kind of community meetings and gaining. In fact, sometimes I think it's to the point where it delays us a little bit because there's doing so much public outreach which is good. I always looking at, oh my goodness, it's, cumbersome, but it's good. I think they do a lot of good community outreach. But I think that Commissioner Wastel said it well. I mean, it's a struggle. I mean, it's, varying communities. We have parts of our county that are very disconnected from Tampa. And yet Tampa is an important component, obviously. The sports teams, a lot of the cultural events happen in Tampa. So, my city's outside of Tampa. So I don't know that there's a perfect balance here. It's a constant struggle about, how much of the pie is going where.
Okay.
And as far as staffing, Melissa can probably answer that better than any of us, but I was just looking at the budget for the TPO. I think 3 years ago, the reason it stuck out, they're funded by grants, but they jumped from like 2.5 million in budgeting to 10.5 million sometime around 3 years ago. I'm not sure exactly what triggered that. I just got elected on November the 8th, but I can tell you that they had a substantial bump in something, I'm assuming, and it did look like their FTEs at that time also jumped up, but I'd have to double check, frankly.
So just to sort of directly speak to the staffing resources, there are, I believe it's 8 positions that are fully funded for the TPO solely. And then there and those positions are grant funded. And then there are additional members of the Transportation Division who are embedded in the Planning Commission's budget. Ultimately, those staff resources are shared and combined, and I would say, absent the TPO executive director, there's few positions that are solely working for the TPO or solely working for the Planning Commission. They, you know, our functions are blended. And so, for example, one of the assistant TPO executive directors is working on the Tampa mobility element for the comprehensive plan, because the transportation expertise is utilized in both organizations. And we very much take a collaborative approach to going out and meeting with the community. We've been having a series of meetings on the county comp plan, the Tampa comp plan. We have, you know, community planning meetings. We were at one in Valrico earlier this week, and transportation staff, TPO staff were there with the Planning Commission staff, kind of seamlessly answering the community's questions and hearing their issues, so that we're able to then sort through that and figure out, well, this is something that needs to feed into the LRTP or the TIP process. This is something that needs to go into that community plan or the comprehensive plan. So that's, we try to operate in a real collaborative manner in that way.
That's great. That's great to know. I think that really wraps up my questions. I mean, I could geek out and ask a million questions, but I think that's the gist of my questions.
All right. Well, thank you so much for joining us today. It was a pleasure, and I appreciate your patience bearing with us when we had some audio issues. And we look forward to speaking to you in the future.
Great. Thank you so much. Have a great day.
You as well.